Welcome to our cross-border conversation, from temp track to final score. How do composers realise their final composition from the temporary music used in the edit? Thank you to the speakers who are drawn from the 2025 cross-border mentoring cohort. And thank you to Genelec for supporting this series of talks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cecilia Muylaert. My pronouns are she, her, a pianist and composer, originally from Brazil, Portuguese Brazilian, and I'm currently living and working in Paris, France.
My name is Farouk Case, last name pronounced Case, suitcase, bookcase, legal case, if you will. He, him, I'm a screenwriter from the UK.
I'm Holly Glover, she, her. I'm an assistant editor and a short film editor. I'm currently working in Glasgow and hopefully soon in London.
I'm Lauren Finch. I'm a composer. I'm based just outside of London and working remotely.
I'm Payal Sethi and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a writer and director from India, currently living in Germany. I started doing this working in the industry a long time ago when I was in New York, and I was assisting the filmmaker Meera Nair, and I started writing and directing my own stuff probably around 2010. I've made 3 short films. I'm working on a feature, and I think, what keeps me going is the collaborative process, I think, of filmmaking is what I love the most and keep coming back to. So it's really nice to actually be here with editors and composers, and of course these are the key people we work with as writers, directors. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone else as well what you brought you into this role that you're currently in.
I work mostly on films. I also assist on TV as well. I've also done like exhibitions in theatre as well, so a real mix, but mostly film. I actually came to it sort of later on. I did like an English degree before I did music, and that's how I got interested in it. But I particularly enjoy composing for film because I like music and I like films, so it's a pretty good combination of both.
I actually came from a computing background. I did a lot of interactive coding and stuff like that, but that led me into mixed media, filming and VFX, especially like sound design and stuff like that. It took me quite a while to become an assistant editor, especially freelance. But working in-house was the best way for me to kind of climb the ladder. Sadly, I was made redundant, but that forced me into freelancing, and I'm now a first assistant on feature films. But yeah, also open to working on anything.
So my long story short is that I have written ever since I realized stories were made up. When I was a kid, as young as 5 years old, when I was watching TV, and when someone told me that's not real, I was like, oh, why is it not real? Oh, it's because it's made up. Why? Because of your imagination. Okay. So from then, that's what I've ever wanted to be and what I've ever wanted to do. Went to university to study creative industries, and from then I wrote books. I wrote 7 children books and 2 adult books, and then dove into screenwriting in 2017 when I figured that's what I really wanted to do, was write for the screen. I've been enjoying it immensely. I've done probably 7 features written and 4 TV pilots. As recently as last year, won a competition in the States, won a competition in the UK, and since then worked on a couple of shorts for some people, script consulting on their scripts for their shorts, and made a short of my own too, which is currently in post.
I also come from a different background. I studied to be a classical musician, a classical pianist, and I went to various schools to study music. I graduated in music and musicology from the Paris Sorbonne University, and I started a postgraduate research there in music. And Sorbonne had a partnership with University of Leeds. And when I went to Leeds, I took composition classes, film scoring classes, because they have an amazing composition department. And I started composing and having people play my music. And I was completely taken with this newfound freedom of creating new music. So I started scoring short films. I did some incidental music to some theater productions. And I shifted from that point on because I started to love this whole process of embarking in a new adventure. In each project, you completely reinvent yourself each time you start a new composition. I'd like to ask Payal, what's your relationship with music when you start writing a new script for a movie? Is it something that influences your script writing, or is it something that you wait to elaborate on further on in the filmmaking process?
I haven't really ever written to music that I think will, be in the film. Now I'm asking myself why not, because it suddenly seems like the thing to do. I do write to music. That's it. I mean, so obviously I am being influenced, but I think music usually comes in for me when I'm editing. That's always the sort of first time I start thinking about music and what fits in there, because I feel like when we're cutting the film with the editor, I sort of prefer to not have any music until we're done with what, like, how we want to tell the story, and not picture locked. We do use music, like temp music in the film, but I would say the first few cuts I like to do without music, and then kind of discover the music that I starts to kind of fit in and make its way into the film. That has been my process actually with all the films I've made so far. Um, I have wanted to write to music though, so I think this is something I'm going to put on my list to do, because I've never really tried that, to be honest. I know I've worked with editors who have wanted it complete, like each one seems to have their own process, even with the editors.
I think each project I approach, I come to it in a different way. Music is always good. It's always a funny one, and especially to find where you're wanting to go. A lot of the time, I don't know if it's just from like short films that I've worked on, but finding temp music, I always try and hold off for as long as possible until I'm with the director, to really kind of prick their brains and see exactly what they're wanting, or even to just approach them with samples of where they would like to take it. But I also don't like to put in music too soon in case people like it and you can't clear it or anything like that. So especially if there is a composer that comes on for the job, I do try to get in touch with them as soon as possible to also find out on a technical level how to send things over and bring things back in. A lot of my approach with the composer is definitely more technical than anything, probably more so because the director themselves already kind of know what scenes the mood is supposed to go in. And I know the editor does have that too, but I usually take that time to collaborate with them to push kind of boundaries as well, to see where we could take the music.
With regard to Cecilia's question to Payal, you mentioned about how you didn't really think about music before with regard to when you're writing and stuff like that. For me, it's quite different, but it depends on the genre that I'm writing. So, for example, last year I wrote a rom-com, and before I wrote it, I put together a playlist. It was over an hour long, and I just played it everywhere I went. And that just put my mindset in the place of lovey-dovey music and rom-com kind of scenery, and music that came from movies like Notting Hill and Bridget Jones and all these other kind of famous, popular rom-com movies. And it got me in the mindset of writing a rom-com. And so similarly, at the present moment, I'm writing a thriller. So every now and again, I'm specifically listening to certain music that puts me in that kind of place. Interestingly, I don't listen to anything while I'm writing, but beforehand, especially when I'm in the mood to get to the laptop to start writing, I'm definitely absorbed by some sort of music that has got me into the mood and the tone and the feel of what I want to put onto the page, because I find that it makes my flow a lot better, and that's because of the music that I've listened to beforehand.
Do you mind if I jump in with one question for both yourself, Cecilia and Lauren? Yeah, it was just about, so kind of coming back to how I was talking and how I like to keep things kind of just bare bones. So when it gets passed over to yourselves, how you approach it. And I was just wondering, how do you approach scenes, either scenes that are sent over to you or a full short? Like, what is your process when you're starting, really?
I'll gather as much information from the director as possible about the narrative of the film as a whole to understand the context of the scene. It's pretty much trial and error. I will try a lot of different things and send them and start a conversation. It's very experimental. You have to try and to find a common language with the director, because people respond to music differently. Something that I think might sound soothing, someone else might think is too sad or melancholic. So it's pretty much a question of trial and error and having a back and forth conversation with the producer and director.
I definitely agree with that. To use an example, like if you have a temp track in there, the first thing I want to know is why they've used it. A really good example is they might have picked it because it sounds sad, but obviously that's subjective, and not because they like the instruments or vice versa. So you really have to know why. You can't assume that, well, not that you would want to do an pretty much exact copy, because you shouldn't be doing that anyway, unless you want to hire a lawyer or anything like that. But I think knowing exactly whether it be a temp track or reference tracks, just being quite specific, like in how you communicate about that is really helpful, because you need to know like whether they've sent a playlist of what they listen to. If I've worked with a writer-director, they've often listened to a playlist like we're speaking to whilst they were writing it. So they might send that, or they might send a few tracks which they like the style of, or they might have a temp track for a specific scene. So my first step is usually finding out like what is it specifically about whatever they sent me they like, because you are probably not making a good assumption if you think all of it is what they want, because you could end up using an instrument which they didn't actually like because they actually like the emotional feel of the piece. So that's usually where I start with it, and then, like Cecilia said, trial and error, having a go with a few things, and then talking about that is usually a really good first few steps.
I just like to add that sometimes you can also bring a new perspective to the film when you come in, and if you think that you can suggest something different, that sometimes can work really well. It's happened to me to suggest something different from the temp track, and the director was really on board with that, and they discovered a new possibility for the music. So it varies from case to case, but it's really interesting when that happens as well, because it's also supposed to be a creative partnership. And when you have these opportunities to really suggest, and a new point of view, it's very interesting as well. I actually have a clip where I had that experience. I received, it's a documentary that was broadcast this last month on France TV, and I received it with a temp track that was different. I mean, significantly different from what the music came to be.
Je m'appelle Violette, j'ai 19 ans, je suis de Besançon, j'étudie le droit à la faculté de droit de Besançon. J'ai été violoniste pendant 12 ans au conservatoire de Besançon aussi. Et je suis non-voyante de naissance. Moi, la musique, je suis née dedans, donc c'est un univers qui a toujours fait partie de ma vie. Mon père, il est saxophoniste, ma mère, elle a été clarinettiste. Quand j'ai voulu faire du violon, mes parents, ils ont trouvé ça plutôt logique.
I received a temp track that was quite sunny and happy. It's, as you can see, it's about a young 19-year-old who was blind from birth and who decided to settle at her university campus all alone. And I suggested that we come in with something more lyrical, and the director, she discovered a new possibility for that opening, that the music could actually portray her inner world, a more sensitive lyrical world. That's an instance where that was a really creative partnership between director and composer.
Just to ask, I've always wanted to know about this kind of thing that you composers do, especially. But is most of what you do through a computer, or do you do like live recordings of various instruments and things like that?
Well, initially, if it's a piano track, I can do it myself, but mostly it's at the computer and usually recorded at a later stage.
Mhm.
It depends on your budget, usually.
Mm.
Yeah. But for most composers, it's safe to say that it usually at some point uses a computer. And then if you've got more budget afterwards, you can record live. But if you're a composer who plays their own instruments, then you can obviously do that from your own studio.
Do you guys ever get any requests for specific instruments that are out of your wheelhouse?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure Cecilia has this, like, the software is really powerful now, so you could, most instruments are sampled nowadays, so if you can't find someone to play it live or it's not in the budget, you can use your computer. Obviously, using live musicians is preferable because it sounds great, but yeah, you have access to pretty much all the sounds you could possibly want, which is good because you get a lot more choice.
Libraries are really realistic, so you can easily demo with a library track.
I did want to come in with more of a technical question from my side as well. Is there anything between that either of you have found between editorial and yourself that has ever been quite confusing, and maybe a good note for assistants to be aware of while working with composers?
A big one for me is if you're editing using a temp track for like a specific tempo, like an action scene, that's fine. Like sometimes you need a tempo. Sending what tempo that is, we can work it out ourselves. But if you then suddenly change the edit for it to be a different pace and the music's already been made, that's fine. All things are possible. But I think if you're editing to a certain tempo and a certain pace, bearing in mind that if it's to a certain track and you change either the editing or you want a different feel to the track, yeah, that's a big one for me in terms of timing and feel.
Attachment to temp tracks is, for me, a slippery slope because if you're just using something, I think, to cut your scene to and it gives you pacing and of course mood as well, because you try to match the mood that you're going for. I worked with a composer on my second short film who specifically said he just did not want any of the temp music in there. I think I trusted him and respected him enough to do that, because I definitely wanted to see what, it's also sometimes nice to, when you're stuck with something, to see what else someone might be thinking, and which is why, the whole collaborative nature comes in. It's one thing in your head, but then you're sharing it and creating it with so many different people who suddenly now also become co-creators, that I think it's nice to have the space to do that. And I think it turned out really well, not giving him the temp tracks. We were using the editor and I, and just letting him go for it.
Just to add what you were saying, I think probably quite a few people are familiar with the term temp love. And if you're not, that just refers to a situation where a director or any of the filmmakers can become sort of find it very hard to let go of the temp track which they use, because often you'll spend a long time editing to it, and so you can feel quite attached to it, which is sometimes why composers are not so keen on temp tracks. Or I don't mind temp tracks, it's just that specific situation when it can be hard, because I think something that's really important and maybe filmmakers will find helpful to bear in mind is it is called a temp track for a reason. It is temporary. And unless you want to pay money to license that specific track, and sometimes these are very popular, well-known tracks that either can't be cleared, or if they can, it's at a significant cost. If you think that you might find it really hard to part ways with that temp track and nothing will ever come close to it, maybe think carefully about using temp tracks. I'm personally not against it if people can kind of let go of it. But yeah, it's called a temp track for a reason. It is temporary, and so you will not have that in the final edit unless you can clear it and afford it. But yeah, it's definitely worth bearing in mind, and that's why in that circumstances, it's like some composers don't want temp tracks.
Yeah, Lauren, how do you compose a track from a temp track? Does it influence you? Do you try to rid yourself from being too influenced from a temp track? Where do you draw that line between using it as a reference and bringing in something of your own?
I think for me, it goes back to asking why it's been used. It's actually quite, I've never really had an awful experience with temp tracks, to be honest. I know I've had friends who are composers who have, so I've been quite fortunate, but I simply ask, like, why have you included it? Is it the emotional feel? Is it the instrumentation? Is it the fact that you've edited to it and it fits the timings? And if it's all three, sure, you might end up with something maybe fairly like something that reflects it, but it shouldn't be the same. So yeah, my approach is just finding out why it's been used. And you can, it's pretty easy to have a track that meets those same criteria without it sounding exactly the same, I would say. How do you approach it, Cecilia?
Yeah, pretty much the same, try to get its fundamental purpose and, its emotional arc and why it was put there. And see what are the important elements, to see the instrumentation, the rhythm, why was it there in the first place, and use that as a reference.
Yeah, that's really cool because I like hearing what you have to say with that, because it kind of reinforces my kind of beliefs of when I'm passing over the edit or just exports or certain scenes to the composer. I really do like to just for yourselves to not be included in like the conversations that I have with the director, and for you to just have a fresh view. And kind of from what I've experienced on my current job, a lot of it's led by the editor and by the picture and what is there and how the mood drives the scene, and then that's where the song then helps that along.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I'm sure directors and screenwriters, please chip in with your opinions about this. But in terms of specifically the question, like the integrity of the music composition, all that of the edit, in my mind, like the film does come first. You're just composing to the film. You're serving the film, and the only time I think I may have ever made a comment about the edit is like the timings. Like if you've edited, like I mentioned, like with an action scene to a very specific tempo, and maybe somewhere in the edit you've moved a scene and it goes slightly off time, we can usually work around that. That's no problem. But sometimes you might just have a conversation and be like, hey, there's just this moment, like it goes actually slightly out of the pace you'd established with all the shots. I can work around that. Do you want me to? When I've asked, sometimes it's been like, oh, sorry, we've slightly changed the edit here, and actually we do want it maintain the pace. But yeah, I would never dream of asking to place the music above the film, because the music is just there to serve the film. You're not doing a music video, are you? Which the pictures are accompanying the music. It's the other way around.
Anything past that point, so as it evolves as well, like anything that editorial do, and if anything changes within the picture, to obviously pass that on to the composer as soon as possible, so then what they're creating isn't void in any shape or form, that they can keep on top of the changes as well while it's going on. But that also just depends on at what point the composer comes on within post too, in the budget, of course.
I was thinking about what you said, Farouk, about having a playlist that inspires you, and it reminded me that again with my second short film, we wanted to create a theme for the for the main character. The composer wanted to do that, and I really like that idea of having a theme, whether you use that theme or not in the music. It sort of was like the starting point. And this was the first time I had experienced this, and he suggested it. But I was just wondering if you guys ever use that approach, Cecilia and Lauren, to start with like maybe a small piece of music that becomes the foundation for the music of the film.
I certainly am a big fan of sharing initial ideas, whether it be thematic ideas or just anything that could end up in the film. A really good compromise, I find. This is slightly off tangent, but it is relevant. If you're wondering temp or no temp and you're worried about temp love, whether you're a director and you're worried about it or you're a composer and you're concerned, I find it really helpful to compose some initial ideas which they can temp with, because suddenly it's not a problem about licensing or anything because it's the music I've made. And especially with character themes as well, where you might want them to develop throughout. Or even if there's not time for that, I have like a catalogue of my own music. I can send over an hour or two of it, and the editor can just use that, and it's in my style. We're suddenly not worried about like copyright or anything like that, or at least the stuff I send. So yeah, I think sending. I mean, I don't know, Cecilia, your experience in terms of using initial ideas to, whether it be themes or anything.
Yeah, when you're involved in the beginning, it's definitely very useful to send ideas early on, and I definitely do that. I send a lot of my own pre-existing music, and sometimes I even develop on top of these pre-existing music. So that's definitely great when you're involved at the beginning. And you, Payal, do you actually ask for the composers to bring in their perspectives, or how do you develop your view for your music?
I would say working very closely with the composer, definitely, to, have them send me ideas or suggestions that then make me think of other things. But I think it's a pretty close collaboration between the composer and me usually. So far, I think it depends also on what you're working on. I can imagine there would be certain things I would write where I might have some pretty strong ideas of a piece of music or a song. I just we made a sizzle reel for a new short that I'm working on, and I have to say, it was really hard to find the right music with the right lyrics. It to the point where when we were done with it, I kind of like wanted to take away the music because it was not, you can't get it exactly right. Yes. So I think for me, the preference will always be to work with the composer's music. Once I've decided who I'm working with, because of what I've heard from the composer, I think it would make a lot more sense to use, the composer's existing music.
I have a quick question for Farouk as well, actually. Yeah, I was just wondering, have you ever been included in post, and especially from writing, are you included by the director or anyone to kind of work out the mood and what you were trying to portray while you were writing?
Yes, but leave it to them because you trust them with that sort of thing, especially when it comes to the director. The director of my short that we done last month, for example, he asked me with regard to the score, and he asked me with regard to the theme, the background music, and all the rest of it. And I was just like, okay, look, you know the mood of the story, you know what the story is, and you know the lesson that comes at the end of the story. So let's not put any kind of circus theme to it. It's not right for the vibe, right? So you trust them with that, and it's. I mean, a question that would come to me afterwards is what I would ask to you, Holly, now, and to Lauren and to Cecilia would be, do you ever have it where you've done the music and you've put it all on and you've put it all together, but then the writer comes along and says that doesn't fit or they don't like it?
Yeah, very fair. No.
I've not had that either. I don't think I've, apart from maybe some premieres, I've rarely actually spoken to the writer of things unless they also happen to be the director as well. So actually have had very little contact with the writers. So it's nice to speak to you about this.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of get dismissed after the story's written, you know. But another thing that I wanted to ask actually was, what about, do you have signatures? Do you leave anything in every single piece of composing that you do that people can recognize it's yours or not?
It's not like we're rappers and we start the track with a certain little thing or anything like that. I personally definitely have a style. I don't know, Cecilia, you share that or not. And it tends to be like a cycle. People hear that, they want a similar thing. So I definitely end up doing something that isn't completely different. I do quite like doing different things though.
I try not to have a style. I try not to repeat myself. So one of the things I like about film scoring is completely reinventing myself musically. But it's kind of like an unwanted consequence that you do repeat yourself involuntarily. You do leave kind of like a signature, but it's not something that you consciously try to do. I do a lot of orchestral music and acoustic piano music, but I try not to have a style. But it's an unwanted consequence. Everybody has a voice, whether they want to or not. It's like an actor, an actor tries to transform himself or herself in each character, but you involuntarily have some trace there of yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Holly, just to ask you something, when you're editing, when you've watched movies or you watch TV shows, do you ever find yourself seeing something and hearing something where you think, oh, that was really cool, or I wish I would have done that because I would have done it better, or something along those lines?
Definitely not could have done it better. But yeah, all the time. I find myself every day, like from just normal telly, daytime telly stuff to films and TV shows. Yeah, like there's so much music that, yeah, just comes across. And I guess a massive point for me in particular, why I love editing, is incorporating a lot of different songs, like especially when I'm working with a composer and I know certain scenes are going to be passed over to the composer. I like to take whatever's out, so when I'm passing it over, it's all fresh for them. But yeah, like I really do like try and find out, especially what songs they are. A lot of my playlists are just composers and their music, and yeah, it really does just add to the whole feel of everything. But then also, just like growing up and through childhood, like a lot of songs that you hear, you're just like, oh, that's in that film or whatever film, or remember that from that TV show. And yeah, it can really add so much.
Yeah, because something I've always found, especially with movies, I'm a massive cinephile. I go to cinema probably twice a week, and some movies can be made better just because of the soundtrack, just because of the background music. And when I was invited to this by the wonderful people at ScreenCraft Works, I was thinking to myself, what movies really resonate with me, as well as the story, but as well as the music too. And I was thinking of like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Titanic, the recent Dune movies. They're brilliant because their soundtrack is as good as their score throughout their films, and it sticks with you. The music comes back to you, and when you hear specific songs or you hear specific lyrics, you're just like, I remember that film. That was a great film. So it makes a big difference, I'd say.
I also have one more question for Lauren and Cecilia, and it's about how you approach your notes. Have you ever been in situations where yourself and the director kind of button heads, or every time you kind of pass over a draft, do you find that, have you ever had a situation where it's been quite difficult to work out exactly what they're wanting and to progress forward?
I haven't had anything extremely difficult. I quite like a good amount of chats with the director, which is maybe preventative, and I didn't realize it, but never really had any very difficult things. And in terms of butting heads, I do take the view that the director is right, because it is their project, if that makes sense. And you are, at the end of the day, as much as it is a wonderful thing to be creative, it is a service you are offering at the end of the day. And just like any aspect, anyone involved in filmmaking, you will get some notes or some feedback, and that's just part of it. Some are easier to implement than others, and some are more difficult, but that doesn't mean it's a difficult situation, if that makes sense. It just might mean that you have to chat it over a bit more to fully understand. But yeah, I think the best directors I've met are really good communicators.
Yeah, same thing. I did not have a negative experience in that sense. What I had is sometimes the director might not be still very sure about what they want, so they will be more open to suggestions and to a new perspective. But mainly, if they have a clear idea, I think that most times it's all about finding a good communication. And really, I have not had that type of experience. Question for Holly and the composers. In your everyday workflow, how often a final edit is sent to the composers? Or usually there are many edit changes that may get in the way of the flow of the score, making the music not match as well with the scenes.
I guess as well, I've worked with an editor before, a director, sorry, before, where we've got music through and we've listened to, we've discussed how we feel about it. It happens more often than not, especially also on the job that I'm working on at the moment, and observing the editor and the director, where again the music gets sent in, they listen to it, they express how they feel. A lot of the times I've done it and they've experienced it too, where it gets moved to a different section of a different scene or a different part of the film. Coming back to the, if anything happens within the edit, and making sure that the composer knows about it and handing over that section if like time codes have changed, or like usually the whole feel of it doesn't change massively, and if it does change massively, then there is conversations with the composer about that. The music can be manipulated in different ways as well to make it fit too, within the edit, that is, but then going back to the composer and saying, this is actually how we're feeling the mood's going and how it's actually playing out. Would you be able to replicate kind of what we're doing or work off of what we've been trying to build?
I mean, basically exactly what Holly said, but just from a composer's perspective. Edits change all the time, and obviously at some point you're going to have to hit pitch lock, but all sorts of things can happen and delays can happen. So generally speaking, I'm working to a rough cut or something closer to a pitch lock, but not quite there. Again, for me, like that's basically the job, is just recomposing back in to fit the new timings. There might be another shot, an extra few seconds. I mean, a really common one is cutting it down, especially working on shorts. They've got 16 minutes. The category they wanted to submit to was 15. That's a new edit. So I think it's for me, it's certainly really expected that is just exactly what's going to happen. And it's just about having a conversation. Usually what I say is like, right, were you happy with what the music was for the rough cut? Is there anything you wanted, providing they've signed off on the cues? Like generally they're happy with the music. Like the new cut is like a minute shorter. Is there anything I should bear in mind, or should I just recomp the music as you would expect, if that makes sense? But yeah, it's just part of it. It's very normal. So
My second short film, which I made in India, I wrote and directed and produced it. The composer is actually my brother-in-law, but he has a very specific way of working, which, like I said, because I respected and trusted him so much, I said, let's do it the way that you want to. And I think it turned out well doing it that way. But that said, the more recent film, I had a completely different experience. So yeah, we can watch it and come back to it.
रायसा सुन मेरी तो फिर नवाज से बात कर अरे रायसा मगर रायसा सुन रायसा रुक रायसा बुलों को वर्जिन जो ना समझी रायसा चल बात करेंगे ना पर रायसा
लेटो लेटो डॉक्टर है लेटो लेटो जरा लो करो
Wow, I definitely want to keep watching that.
So we ended up having quite a bit of music. This was the the bit that kind of it's very sort of lyrical and it's sort of floating over the scenes, but this was the theme that he came up with first, before we got into any of the other, scoring any of the rest of the film. And it was really nice to have this anchor, musical anchor to work with, and then go from there to scoring the rest of the film. It is in India, as I'm sure you guys know, we tend to have a lot of music in our films, sometimes too much. But definitely here we ended up, I just loved everything he composed so much. It was really hard to say, okay, where can I leave out the music? So that was the challenge here because you like you were saying with temp love, there's also I think like a score love, maybe like the final score love, and you also sometimes have to cut things out because you kind of want the emotion to play for itself and not always have to underscore it with music, however beautiful the music might be that your composer gave you. So I don't know if you guys, Cecilia and Lauren, if you ever had that experience where you had to take out stuff after creating it because it just was the better choice, I guess, editorially.
I think a really good example is, or like not even reaching the point of thinking you need music in a scene. Like sometimes everything that needs to be said and communicated has been through the acting and filming. And sometimes the best thing to do is just be like, it doesn't need music, which is part of composing, knowing where you should and should not have music. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
What Lauren said, I think less is more. So the less that music, you should really only use music if you really have to, So yes, that has, I usually send much more music than is used. And sometimes it's a bit frustrating, because, oh, you could have used this or that. But I think that less is more and with music, definitely.
I guess I would just want to emphasize with regard to when you're writing a specific genre, especially maybe go back to movies that have that same genre and listen to what's in the background and listen to the soundtrack at the end and stay for the credits and listen to the rest of that and just see how it all meshes together, because obviously it plays an important part. And like I say, for some movies, they really stick with you more because of the music.
I think I would just, as kind of like a final bit of advice, is temp music is a really useful tool, but it is just a tool, and it has a very specific purpose. And if used well, it's really, really helpful, but you got to use it well.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that as well, from an editorial stance of like everybody approaches things differently, and how you would like to approach your work is totally up to you. But I have felt myself and how I've done it, and trusting in the composers and passing it over so they have a fresh pair of eyes without any music on it, I've always found has been very helpful for me and the film at the end of the day. Yeah.
The earlier you start working with your composer, your sound designer, basically everybody, right? With my most recent short, the sound design and composition, like the composing was almost hand in hand, like it had to work together. There's a lot of like the sound design elements being used, to sort of echo something in the music and vice versa. So I think having, having people involved as early as possible, and editors too. Like I've had editors tell me, let me read your script when you're ready to share it, because I'd love to have a conversation. And I think for me, I've realized these are the sort of collaborators I want to work with, who would like to be involved from the very beginning.
Getting involved with a composer early on is definitely very interesting and definitely adds a lot to the composing process and makes the communication much simpler, because sometimes a temp track, it's useful, but there's always the danger of getting too attached to the temp track. So I would say get involved with the composer early on in the process.